Hello and welcome back. It's time to jump into our next product. We are photographing a backpack by our friends at Peak Design. We're starting off with a relatively similar lighting setup, but we have some new challenges.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really nice details in this bag. Even though we have 100 megapixels of phase 1 camera that we're dealing with, still want to see this thing from different angles and really show off that craftsmanship.
Like I've noticed when I'm purchasing something online, you see a main view of the product,
Right.
and then sometimes you see closer views of little details here and there.
Yeah, so we're actually going to change our perspective a little bit. So you can see like corners of the backpack. They're really what make this bag unique, and that's part of the story that we're trying to tell. So as you can see, this shot is very similar to the previous shot. Our lighting setup is very similar. It's very flattering. It works for both. We're going to be changing the angle of these loops, these pull tags, just so that everything looks symmetrical, which is a very similar process to our previous bag when we were arranging all the straps.
Definitely. Just some styling, things like that, making sure it renders well on camera.
Then we're going to do a few things that once we're set and happy, we'll of course do our different option for the background, which also works great for this bag. And then we'll move on. We'll move towards tighter details.
That lighting was relatively universal. We were able to put this bag in here, and it's kind of like good to go. A lot of the time, we're not just photographing one product. We're photographing a series of products.
Right. And you might have to make minor tweaks depending on the material changes and things like that. But if you can get a lighting setup that you think will work for generally everything that you're trying to shoot, that's a great place to start.
We're moving in. We got a little closer here.
We got closer and we changed our lens. We're using a 55 millimeter lens in this shot.
A little wider.
Right. The slight distortion of that actually makes the bag feel fuller. That's why we had the 55 instead of the 80. But we're going to switch, and we actually are using the 120 millimeter blue ring macro lens for this shot. And that's going to give us a really shallow depth of field.
Like this whole time, we've always said you want the whole product in focus. You want the whole product in focus. And now
we're going to break that rule.
We're breaking that rule.
Yeah.
Why?
This photographic function of depth of field creates emphasis. Like if you're shooting someone's portrait and you want to be focused on the eyes, and those maybe not as important, you're going to use shallow depth of field. We're basically showing the eyes of this bag.
We already photographed the bag in its entirety with everything in focus. So that is like a check mark, and now we're going to be like, hey, you should look at this detail.
Exactly, and we're going to do it two ways. We're going to do it with our focus, and we're going to do it with our lighting. One thing that you need to make sure that you're doing is we're still trying to get everything that we're trying to show in focus. So we do have to make sure that we're checking that throughout the process, and that gets really difficult when you're
shooting shallow.
So you absolutely must, I'm going to say again, must use a tripod. The Peak Design label is what I really want to focus on, and its contrast to all these other different elements in the frame. Now, this is how incremental it gets. The design part of the Peak Design
is in focus.
But Peak is not.
It's crazy. I'm also like, I want Peak Design to be like parallel to the bottom of the bag.
You can do that later.
Which is the Photoshop part of it, exactly.
Also, if you have to move quickly, if you're cropping it way out here, you're not going to notice that it's not in focus. All right, so let's zoom in again. And we'll just see the progression. This is me hunting for the focus here. And there's a lot of tools in Capture One that you can use, especially when you're using phase 1 cameras. You can actually control the small step motors that control the focus using little arrows, and it'll move back and forth. I think you can do it with Canon as well.
For sure. Sony's capture program allows you to do that if you use Sony's lenses.
So we're getting closer. I'm just jogging the lens back and forth.
And there we're looking pretty good.
Yeah, this is where we ended up. Maybe a little soft on the G in the end, but I really like how this is looking overall. One thing I want you guys to notice is how razor thin the depth of focus is, but also how much is in focus. So you can tell that this part of the patch and this accessory mount are both on the same plane. And that's actually parallel with the front of your lens.
If you needed to rotate the bag to have more or less of that label in focus, you could do that.
Right.
Which is, I think, what you did in the very next shot.
I did. So now we can get all of these little details in focus. It also becomes very graphic that we're looking at it straight on. It's not quite the framing I was hoping for, so we move on to the next frame, and I pulled back just a little bit. Everything is in focus, and it looks, frankly, very cool this way. The other thing that you want you to notice is we actually put in a little white card to bounce in a little light on this metal. It just represents and renders a little bit better.
Yeah.
But also gives a little separation from the fabric itself. Just for safety, I pulled the camera back just a little bit so we have a little extra room around the outside and we can crop in later.
Right, because the farther away you are, the more is going to be in focus.
So we'll move on to a little corner detail shot. I really wanted to focus on this rivet, this little contrast stitching, and this other zipper pull over here. And let's zoom in and see where we're at on those. See, we're a little soft right here. And even further away, it looks fine. It resolves fairly well. So I'm really trying to highlight this rivet, and it really needs a little something extra. It's kind of fading into the bag itself. So we've added a little bounce card that I'm changing around and trying to bounce the light above my head. It's the easiest to catch, especially when you're this tight in. So it really helps here, and you can see it change. I lose it here. It gets a little dark.
Right.
You know, I'm just trying different things to get where we want to go. And then once I am satisfied, I'll show you where I started. So that's quite a big difference.
It is, yeah. It's subtle, you know. It's not something that I would necessarily have worked on. But you're right. The rivet definitely stands out more, and everything is in focus.
Because this is out of focus just slightly, it doesn't feel as nice as this one. I know that sounds a little trivial, but I mean, it's something you notice. And then when you put all these images together of this bag, you're collectively going to feel different.
You know, the overall shot, it's like, okay, that's the bag, but
Right.
these detail shots really do kind of drive home the quality of the product.
Yeah, and there's things that you experience when you're working with something. You know, one thing I noticed when I was kind of manipulating the bag for all of our other detail angles were these rivets that connect the straps, which is something that's pretty unique. So I wanted to really focus on it.
You've got some rigging going on here, and my assumption is that you're not planning on using this entire photo.
No, you know, if we were trying to use the straps, there'd be a lot more going on here. But I really want to just use, actually maybe a little more zoomed out, but right here, this is what I want to use.
Right.
But we're missing some detail in here, and there's a high dynamic range tool in Capture One, and you can try and recover some of your highlights. But there really just isn't the information that we were seeing.
Yeah, they almost look like lights or something like that. I don't see any detail.
Yeah, and they're not really rendering as well as even the rivets next to them. The bag is actually swinging forward. The weight of it is pushing it forward, so it's reflecting the softbox above it. And the light is totally blowing out the metal. So we just swung it backwards.
Okay.
So let's take a look at what happens when we do that.
Oh yeah, that's a huge difference.
For the rest of this, we're working just to finesse the rest of the bag and spread the straps out a little bit so we make sure we have enough we can crop into.
Nice.
Yeah, and we can enhance a lot of these things, but now we have the information there to actually be able to do it.
Yeah, so this is cool. I've learned a lot from photographing this bag. A lot of it is, you know, capturing the bag as a whole, but also finding the unique elements of this bag. Like, what makes this bag different from all the other bags out there? And then just really getting in close and focusing on those details.
Right.
Now, when it comes to working with a client, would you have all these shots mapped out ahead of time?
Yeah, I mean, frequently you would storyboard things or have at least requirements from the client.
Okay.
And then I usually like to build in time to explore stuff like things that we notice. And usually they trust me enough to be like, yeah, that sounds cool. Or if I have something totally wacky and they're like, we don't know, they'll still let me do it anyway. You know, sometimes it doesn't look well. But, you know, that's part of the exploration.
During our photo shoot,
Right.
we did have a few shots. One where we were photographing a purse,
Yeah.
and we tried throwing it in the air, and
It really didn't work.
it just didn't work.
It didn't. It would have required a lot more rigging, and we just didn't have time. We had shots that were already successful.
Yeah, sometimes that stuff works, sometimes it doesn't, but the important thing is you have the core images to fall back on.
Well, and generally, I'll also do a pre-light. Pre-light is just a day or a set of time where you can go and try things out.
What if you don't have the exact product? Do you just use a stand-in, something that's similar?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Metal things are metal. You know, wooden things are wooden. They react similarly.
Well, that's it for this section. Ross, thanks so much. Now, if you haven't already done so, please leave us a review on Flurn.com. You can do that right down below. It helps us out know what you liked, and it helps everyone else out there as well. Now, in our next section, we're going to wrap everything up. We're photographing some beautiful leather bags on colored backgrounds. We've got some great things to teach you there. Thanks so much. I'll Flurn you later. Do you want to Flurn them later as well?
I'll Flurn you later.
All right, we'll see you in the next section, which is our very last. Thanks so much.